Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I'm delighted to be joined by Steve Goodman, Content and Code, United Kingdom, who will be talking to you today about keeping teams under control without holding back your workforce. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC20. Don't forget to check out the Resource Center. This is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit sharepointeurope.com and click the content link at the top. Welcome to Teams Week, where we have a variety of blogs, ebooks, and webinars, all free and all online. Check out sharepointeurope.com for full details on all upcoming webinars. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any question you have in the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered during and at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you'll be notified by email when it becomes available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Steve Goodman. Hello, Steve.
Hello and good morning, everybody. So in our session today, we're going to be talking about how you can keep teams under control without holding back your workforce. A little bit about me, if you don't know who I am. My name is Steve Goodman and I work at a company in the UK called Content and Cloud. We used to be called Content and Code and recently changed names. And I work with customers across the whole of Microsoft 365, though traditionally I've came from an Exchange and identity background rather than SharePoint. And these days spend a lot of time working with Microsoft Teams with customers. And if you want to listen to more of the stuff I do, you can, of course, listen to the All About 365 podcast, which I do with my fellow MVP, Jason Wynn, or the Practical 365 podcast, which I do with Paul Robershaw. And of course, if you want to, you can follow me on Twitter @Steve Goodman. But in the session today, we're going to go through several things. We're going to first of all have a look at the overall structure, right? So we're going to start with some of the basics for where we need to begin if we're going to understand how to keep those teams under control. So how groups fit into Microsoft Teams. And really the key thing that we want to understand is what the importance of good governance is and how we can put this into place. So we're going to have a look at how we can manage that creation process, or whether we should we allow people to do whatever they want with teams or not. It depends on the organization. And the other things that we can do to keep our teams under control as well. So making sure that things expire, using templates, guest access, all of that. But first, we'll start with how Microsoft 365 groups fit into Teams. So if you are a Microsoft 365 expert, then the next few minutes will be something that you've probably seen before. So I will keep this reasonably brief, but of course not everybody has been with Office 365, Microsoft 365 for years. And when you're approaching Teams, if you don't know some of these fundamentals, then it doesn't make a lot of sense. And what is fundamental with Teams, when we're talking about the teams in Teams, the teams and channels, the file structure, it's Microsoft 365 groups, right? So without Microsoft 365 groups, we wouldn't have Teams. It was built on top of that really good foundation, where Microsoft 365 groups was designed as something that could fit across all of these different services. So when we look at Teams, it's that entry point into lots of things inside Microsoft 365, but the glue for access permissions and making sure that things like a calendar, stream, planner, SharePoint, document library are all there. Is Microsoft 365 groups. For every Microsoft 365 group, you can turn that into a team. For every single team, you've got a Microsoft 365 groups. So we've got our services like Teams at the top, like Yammer at the top, like Planner. We've got Microsoft 365 groups. All of these live in Azure Active Directory, where all of that is stored as the master. And that's where it fits in for Teams as well. So if we are going into Teams, we create a team as a user, then it creates that Microsoft 365 group, as you can see in number 2. And it also then pushes that up the service to Azure Active Directory, and then creates entities in all of those other services. So that's the reason why there might be a slight delay when you create a team. You'll click on the File tab immediately after, or you'll go and set the picture for the team moments after, and it's not quite ready yet because it takes a little bit longer for that loosely coupled process of synchronization where services get notified to go up there. So when a team gets created, what we end up with is an inbox, somewhere in Microsoft Exchange that has a hidden calendar, has the place where the compliance records will get stored for things like chats. We get the SharePoint document library, OneNote notebook, and of course we've got that persistent chat space workspace as well. And if we want to manage the group membership for teams, then we can do that with things like dynamic groups in Microsoft 365. We can expand the group by adding a distribution list to that as well. But fundamentally, this is that group object where it uses that Microsoft 365 groups to synchronize and propagate those services across those other pieces. So without 365 groups, we don't have teams. So making sure that we have governance in place for Microsoft 365 groups is absolutely key. Now, it's easy to talk about planning things right from the start if you've not started yet. So when I say plan governance from the start, if you are 6 months or a year into your team's journey and you let people just go at it, right? Because you had no choice. You needed to stand up teams quickly, or quite rightly at the time it made more sense to have less governance. Then all is not lost. You can come back from this if you've decided now that you need to get things under control. It's obviously better if you can plan governance from the start, but there's certainly a case to be made that if you let people just create teams organically, then you're actually going to get a good idea for how they might want to use it. Some of that viral usage of teams within the organization could not have happened if you had started with perhaps the wrong governance approach. So if you've done something today, you're looking to now get things under control, then all isn't lost. So if you are going to start again today, though, or you're starting now, then you need to decide on what the model is going to be for provisioning of groups, and what happens with the data in that group over time as well, and what protection you need to provide over the data inside it. And we've got some options available here. So ideally, and this is again a big matter of debate between IT professionals, then ideally we will lean towards self-service provisioning, because usually people in the business, for the best part, know what they need, and they don't want to be held back by IT getting in the way. I know as a user at my organization, Continental Cloud, if I can't go and create a team for the thing I'm working on, and I would have to go and raise a request in a service desk, I'd find that very disruptive. And so our ideal position is that we try and make this easy, but we want to make sure that whatever somebody does, we've got the right policies in place to manage what happens to that data, so that we don't need to check in and look for old groups or data that hasn't been accessed. Coming from an Exchange side, one of the biggest problems that we've had over time has been public folders, and the self-service nature of teams and groups is reminiscent of public folders, where if you've used public folders or you've seen them in use where people effectively let the whole organization create their own structures, these can get wildly out of control, and then trying to clean these up later on has been very difficult. The good thing about Microsoft 365 groups in comparison is it has the ability to expire data that isn't used. It has the ability to set a time limit on things, so that we don't need to look for something that hasn't been accessed for a year, email the person who created that data and say, can we delete it? We can put those policies in place that will manage that whole process for us. We can, of course, monitor the group usage as well, and we might also want to look at some of that sprawl and rationalize what's there. And we also might need to understand what policies need to be applied within the organization. Do we need to label, or do we need to set the right type of a group for different people? Do we have confidential information? Do we have private versus public groups as well? So starting with self-service, we've got several options, and the first of that is, as I say, enabling self-service for everybody. And obviously, this isn't the right choice for all organizations, but it is the place that you should start and consider whether that will be suitable for the company you work for. If we would think of perhaps a school, then you probably wouldn't want people to go and create children and pupils to go and create teams for one another. But if you're working in a large business, most people are office style workers, knowledge workers, then you almost certainly will. If you've got a mix of different workers, first line workers in the business, perhaps it's something like retail, perhaps you have staff who have quite a high turnover and are less connected to the organization. And I know I'm really fussed if they do say the wrong thing, then you might be in a more difficult scenario where, when you come to think about enabling self-service for everybody. So, but it is a good starting point. And then what we're doing is, first of all, we're trying to remove that need to try and anticipate what the business needs. We can, of course, complement that with pre-provisioning teams for all the right departments, aligning those to line managers, all that sort of good stuff. But we're not trying to restrict people from being able to say, I've got this great idea, let's put it all in a team, bring in a planner, we'll have a chat about that, we'll keep it all in one place, and then we'll do this new innovative project for the company. We're not stopping them from doing things like that. Of course, what we can also do is limit the self-service, so it is just a subset of users. So with our school example, then it may be that you do want teachers but not pupils to be able to create teams. It might be that in your office environment or your retail environment, you want line managers to be the people that create a team. So you can put that down to, so it goes through some sort of user-led governance process to decide whether something warrants a team or not. So people have to think first. They have to talk to their team lead and say, do you think we should have a team for this? Would you create one for me? So we can, of course, limit that self-service. And that's possibly better than trying to block it altogether. Or we can do custom provisioning workloads. And this is where the SharePoint folks, I know who are listening today, will certainly I've been through these processes before, especially where it is requests for document libraries and having those provisioning workflows to go and create document libraries with the right information architecture, the right perhaps artifacts provisioned. That's reasonably common when we're talking about SharePoint, less so with Teams because it's not built in entirely to the product. That's where we might need to send people to a form. We might need to have a workflow to enable or disable the ability for people to create those teams. What we'll usually see is a form or something that's added as an app inside Teams. Someone can go in, they can request the type of team, they can pick a template from the drop-down list, and then based on who they are, then that'll go through an approval process. So if I was somebody working in a shop, and I thought it'd be a great idea to have a team for my colleagues to discuss what we were doing, then it might go to my line manager or the area manager to approve that. And they might say, well, actually, we've already got one. We just hadn't added everybody to it yet. So those custom provisioning workflows, are aimed at really sort of supplementing that limiting self-service, so everybody can still request a team, but it's saving some of that effort along the way. So what controls have we got? We've got first of all, the naming controls. So we've got a prefix and a suffix based naming policy that we can use for groups. And I'll give you some advice on when you should or how you should use those shortly. You can also block certain words, not necessarily rude words, but it might be that your marketing team or sales teams or communications teams don't want people to use keywords that they have for key projects. They don't want lots of sales groups being created with those names, for example. But of course, as an administrator, we can override all of those if we need to. When we're managing who can create the groups, then we can use Azure AD premium features to say only this group. This could be a massive group of people. It could be everybody from line manager and above in the company will be the people who can create those groups. And we can also classify the groups as well. So we've got the ability outside of this, and we're not going into Microsoft information protection in this session today, to use sensitivity labels, but we've also got the ability to classify a group as well. So if we wanted to say this was internal only, well, we're not protecting the content, it's a tag really to guide the user, then we could use group classifications to say, the internal only, do not add guests, confidential, to give people an indicator as to what kind of information this group contains, so they're guided into doing the right things or adding the right things. Now, the licensing is very dependent upon what you can do. So there's lots that you can do with the basics and free licensing. So Azure AD Premium Plan 1 is, however, required for a lot of the good governance features. So being able to limit it to a group of people requires Azure AD Premium Plan 1. Setting a group naming policy, being able to say, put a department name at the end of every team, again, that requires Azure AD Premium Plan 1. And what this means is if you are running Microsoft 365 business standard licenses or below, or you've bought Office 365 E3 licenses, but you haven't got EMS, or you haven't added on Azure AD Premium, or you haven't bought Microsoft 365 E3, then some of these controls are not available to you. So it does mean that you need to consider whether people can create them at all, or whether you need to realize that actually you are going to have to entrust people to make the right decisions, and things like group expiry, you will need to do something like review old groups and suggest ones that might be removed. We've also got some security and compliance features that are relevant as well, and these fit into different buckets inside the Microsoft 365 suite. So with things to do with the compliance, then we're usually looking at Office 365 features. When we're looking at information protection, identity, mobile devices, then we're looking at what's the EMS functionality, which is, so the security features sit in the EMS bucket. So for things like retention policies, to define how long we must keep data within the organization or hold it for search, then we're using the E3 licenses, which are the most common licenses that people have. With certain things like data loss prevention, then some governance features, like being able to put policies in place to stop somebody sending a credit card over Teams chat, or pasting that or pasting that into the chat, or pasting that into a channel, sorry. Those require Office 365 E5 licenses. Our DLP functionally covers email. It covers contents of files, so stuff you put into the Files tab, stuff in OneDrive, but we need to go to the E5. So there's a question, do all users in the tenant need an Azure AD Premium license for group creation policy? Now, I caveat everything to do with licensing with I'm not a licensing expert, but I think everybody covered by a particular everybody covered by a particular policy needs the license. So that you absolutely check with Microsoft, check with your your licensing vendor, CSP, provider, LA, or whatever. But my understanding is it's not just the admin that is setting the control, it's everybody that's going to be affected by the policy. So everybody that is allowed to create a group, for example, needs to have that particular license. And what if you have a mix of licenses, E3, F3, and E5? Some governance is available, and looking for a group that consists of a line manager, E5, and kiosk users, F3. Should all these be covered with Azure AD Plan 1, i.e., so exploration can be used? Well, this is why it's absolutely simpler if you have Microsoft 365 licensing rather than Office 365 licensing, because things like group expiry, I think it's one of those areas where it doesn't happen so often these days, because people will buy, say, like for example, you're licensing first line workers. There's going to be a benefit to doing. It's going to be reasonably cheap to buy M365 F3 licenses, because it covers the Intune stuff, it covers the Azure AD Premium stuff, because there's lots in there that's useful, and it covers the access to the productivity tools as well, it covers the Windows licenses if needed, and it's pretty much at the same price point as like an Office 365 E3 license. So I see that used more often than the older F1 licenses for Office 365. So I would sort of start with the position that everybody covered by a policy needs the right license. So if that's groups with expiry policies, everybody in the group is, I would think, would need that license. However, what I would have to do, for example, in that specific case, is go and check and see whether it is just the owners of the group or what have you. I think traditionally it's really hard with a mix of licenses where there's certain features, like core features like Azure AD Premium, if they don't apply to some people and they do apply to others, it's very difficult to manage on an ongoing basis. And because it's quite a trust-based license, then you've got a responsibility, rather than Microsoft putting automated controls in place. You've got a responsibility to try and understand exactly who needs what and when. And that it's never a good idea for say me to write on a screen what the point in time view for Microsoft is today. You've got to get something. You can't say, well, I watched a blog or I saw a webinar that said it. You need to get something on paper from Microsoft that says, yeah, we agree with that position, or from Microsoft Docs. Certainly after this, happy to follow up if you grab me on Twitter though, on that particular question. But licensing is a painful area for Microsoft. You can simplify it by going for things like Microsoft 365 licensing, rather than picking bits out from here, there, and there, add-on licenses and so on. So assuming we've got all the right licenses in place, so let's assume we've got Microsoft 365 E3 licenses or F3 licenses and above in our organization, because that keeps it simple. We want to control the group creation process. Now, the first question is, should we really? So and again, this comes back to limiting it to certain roles in the business that can do it. We need to lean back on guidance that is not just Microsoft's guidance, but certainly other practitioners who've been doing this for large organizations who've done this, got to the end of successful projects, it's rolling out, it's been successful in the business. Self-service has absolutely worked, and you want to, as somebody administering the service, try and reduce the admin overhead as well. So if you can, if there are specific things like business units where there should be a whole team set up, or departments, and that information is already present and it's automatically updated in your Active Directory, such as department name and so on, use dynamic membership to remove that overhead of adding and removing, because then you don't need your JML process to try and factor this in. You're using the tools inside the suite, like dynamic membership for groups, to just do this for you. And And if people do need to go through a request process, make sure people know what that process is. There's nothing worse than somebody seeing that there's a join or create a team button and it doesn't work. And then they're lost. Who do I go and ask this for? Do I just raise a service test ticket? Do I ask my manager? You know, you can do more harm than good by not giving people the right information if your ultimate goal is to drive adoption of the service. So if you do put the brakes on what people can do themselves, make sure they know what the process should be. And if you do put those brakes on, then look back after some time, perhaps when you have had a chance to put in some of these controls, then revisit that decision to restrict self-service and decide whether you can do it now. So yeah, Office 365 groups can be based on, you can use a dynamic group for Microsoft 365 groups, one of the questions in the chat. So if we're going to limit group creation, then there's an example on the screen here. You'll see this in the video afterwards. This is an example from Microsoft. So this is available on the Microsoft Docs website. But obviously, if you grab a copy of today's session, then you can look at that. I wouldn't recommend trying to copy and paste this from the video though. This is how easy, if I had my camera on, you'd see me doing air quotes here, how easy it is to set up a security group and then assign it to Azure AD so that it limits who can create groups. And while this looks like a lot of code on the screen here, it's not as complicated as it looks. This sample code guides us through the process of creating an Azure AD group, and then it stamps that group into Azure AD. So we've got basically a list of settings in Azure AD that contain all of the settings for Office 365 groups. They're not so visible from the portal, but they are easily accessible using PowerShell. And we need to pull out that list of group settings. And once we've pulled out that list of group settings, then we stamp back into the group that we're going to use, and will contain all the people that are allowed to create groups. So while it's a little bit of code on the screen, and if you're not a PowerShell user day to day, it might look daunting. This is a 2-minute job to select a group, pick a group from that contains all of the people that are allowed to create groups, stamp that into Azure AD, and then you've got that governed process for who can or can't do it set up. So we're not going to go too much into PowerShell because a lot of the other options for doing these restrictions have made their way into the user interface, not into the Teams user interface, but into the Azure AD portal. So I'll show you some of those shortly. One of the useful ones is managing naming for Microsoft 365 groups. And a good reason for that is to make sure things are consistent depending on where they came from. So where I work at Content and Cloud, our policy for self-created groups is they all say ad hoc at the end. Other customers might choose the department name or code, so it's easy to identify whose groups are whose. And it allows an element of consistency to be applied. As I mentioned earlier, we can block words like organizational restricted words like communication, sales, marketing, and so on, so things don't get too confusing. If you don't need them, then don't use them just for the sake of it. And with Teams, it's better to use a suffix rather than a prefix. I'm sure all of you have used Teams, and will know that you've got the left-hand rail with all the list of your teams in, and that's not a lot of space. So if you've got a long prefix, then you could, of course, go into a situation where a user looks at all their teams, and they can't see which one's which, apart from the icons, because it'll have the prefix taking up all that space. So use a suffix at the end, because then it won't be annoying to a user, because they won't see it unless they look for it. You as an admin will see it in the portal, and it won't stop them from being able to see and find their teams easily. Keep it as short as you can, And if you're basing it on something like departments and so on, then you can bring in attributes that you can use to set this. And you'll see in this example here, then I'm setting up in the Azure AD Admin Center a group naming policy where all I've needed to do is go into naming policy, click on group naming policy, and I've got the choice to add a prefix or a suffix in here. And I've picked an attribute, so I'll add the department name at the end of all of the teams that people then go and create. The group blocked word policy is very simple as well. And we can download the blocked words, and then we can re-upload that list and store them in the service. Very straightforward. If you've got a team that will be responsible for things like that, then you can download that, share that over SharePoint with them so they can co-author that list with you, and then re-upload that into the Azure AD Admin Center. Now, group expiration policies. I think these are probably the thing that Microsoft have done that are going to prevent Teams and Microsoft 365 groups from becoming the next public folders. So this is it's not the reason why you should buy Azure AD premium licenses if you don't have them, but it's one on the big long list of tick boxes for time it's going to help you save, because these are going to stop that horrible cockroach situation that public folders, people often say the cockroaches of Exchange. It's going to stop that from happening, because it gives us that ability just to time these out. And these really came into their own when a year ago Microsoft GA'd, released for everybody to use, the ability for it to be activity based rather than just time. So a group expiration policy, basically this is setting automatic renewal of Teams, Microsoft 365 groups, based on activity. So if I created a team, maybe we're planning this webinar today, and we spent a week collaborating, furiously getting our session together and out, but we never use it again, then if somebody from IT emailed me a year later and said, "Do you still need this?" I'd be like, "Yeah, maybe." And that's the usual problem that people experience when they're trying to get rid of business data. So we might have policies that say how long it will physically be retained for on disk, even if it's inaccessible to the user. But getting people to make that decision on whether they never want to see something anymore, can be quite difficult. Just like if you move house and you try and decide what important things to throw out, and you see that thing that you've not used for 3 years. And if it just had automatically, if it had reminded you and said, "Steve, you never used that camping oven. It needs to go," and it kept on reminding you, can I throw it away? Yes. Can I throw it away? It's gone. This is effectively doing that. It notifies the owners and it allows them to keep it if they want. So if they do genuinely want to keep it, then we're not removing it. If they miss it, then it's not the end of the world. Perhaps they're on holiday or vacation, they come back, they've missed the notification, the group was deleted, and they want it back. Then we can of course restore that. But it's not something that we just want to throw out and start using with everybody. We don't want to switch this on tomorrow. It might bring us to that nirvana, right, for groups, but it's probably a bad idea to just start using it. So pilot it with specific groups to start with, after looking at the reports to understand where this should or shouldn't be targeted. And you need to let people know that this is going to happen as well. You don't want the first service desk call to be an angry executive who's been told that his or her their important group is being removed without warning, and perhaps being outraged by this. Make sure that there's a comms process to avoid that pain of trying to then explain, no, this isn't such a bad thing. We are just trying to make sure that we keep the environment under control. It's also important that, and this is probably something I should have put in big bold letters on a slide of its own, that groups have more than one owner. And unfortunately, people do leave organizations. And unfortunately, they get promoted or they move into different roles. So it's really important that you make sure that you don't end up with a situation where a group is ownerless and nobody knows whose it is. So you want to try and make sure that more than one person owns every group, so that there is somebody that can get that notification and make a decision based on it. So we can set up these policies quite easily, and we can start and test this with those pilot groups very, very easily. So we can pick a group lifetime. So how long this group should last if it's inactive, and we can also set up that email contact for those no owner groups. So it at least proactively tells us that we should go and do a bit of investigation to decide who the new owners should be. Perhaps that person got promoted into a new role, but one of their team also got a promotion, is now the team lead and should be owner of that group, but wasn't able to take ownership automatically, and their boss had left the group before then. And we can set this to affect all groups. Of course, don't do that to start with. Default, which is none, or are selected, where we can pick some of those groups where we've looked, we think that they're inactive, and then we can set these notifications up, tick those boxes and press save, and add those to the list as well. Now, one of the cool things I want to talk to you about, I hope you will have seen, because Microsoft launched it earlier in the year. So we got the big announcement, we got the demos of it earlier in the year, and then it was announced at Microsoft Ignite 2020 as coming to GA, in a couple of weeks after that started rolling out into tenants. Oh, I'll just address the question here. Are global administrators allowed to override the naming policy and expiration policy, please? Yes, absolutely. Yes. So what I was showing you then was what a global admin would see. Now, a global admin for teams, groups, create it with whatever name you want, rename them to whatever you want. Absolutely fine. Expiration policies, absolutely. You could take any groups that you don't want to be in those policies out of that list as well. So yes, you can absolutely override those. But back to Teams templates. So Teams templates are, I think they're absolutely amazing. And there's some way for them to go. I see this, and you probably should as well, as a version 1 of what they can do. This has made things a lot easier for people, right? And I think you will, if you use Teams, you'll have seen this arrive. Now, the challenge I've seen over the years with the Teams, especially when we're trying to do all this governance stuff, part of this is not about controlling what people do. It's trying to make sure that we enable them to do the right things. So imagine a scenario where we have no governance and we're not, we're not really doing any adoption or guidance, and we just throw it over the fence and let people use it. People still do that. We don't want somebody to look at these tools and just try and figure out all of the right ways to use it. I saw a comment on Twitter from someone replying to somebody else saying, I don't feel as productive as I should do. Someone told me Teams was going to solve that. And then somebody replied, and they're like, yeah, I know, it just feels like we're all trying to work it out for ourselves. We're trying to butter a piece of toast with a spoon. And this is the problem that people have, because they don't want to be technology experts most of the time. They also want to be able to be empowered to do the right thing, but they need the right guidance. So expecting them to figure out how all of this stuff should fit together themselves, it's not something that they've got time for. Teams templates allow us to curate some of our best practice, things that we've seen that work well. If you're following Teams adoption guidance from Microsoft, then you'll be familiar with those terms, like experimenting with different parts of the business to see what works and then rolling that out more widely. Now, you also want to be able to capture that essence of what worked well and then make sure it's easily accessible to other people. And this is what the Teams templates are designed to do, because it means that they're not going to go and do things in random ways. They've at least got the opportunity to pick your organization's idea of what a project looks like, or what an opportunity looks like, or what a regional office team looks like. And these templates encapsulate the simple stuff. Yeah, this isn't rocket science. The engine that makes it work is, but for you as an admin, figuring all this out, it's not rocket science, because we're just defining what the channels are, the tabs are, and the apps, and then we're giving it a name. There's some predefined templates from Microsoft, which is absolutely great, but it's not perfect yet. It doesn't do everything. It does enough to give all of those clues to people. So if we've got a team and it works well, but usually if you were creating this by hand for people in advance of them using it, then perhaps you'd put an initial announcement in guiding people on the right way to use it. You'd attach the apps properly to that. And you'd also want to target these so that a sales team see their opportunities, the project office see project related templates. And at the moment, we can't curate those for different groups of people. But if you are using some sort of workflow, you've built your own custom bespoke provisioning system for Teams, or you bought one in, then Teams templates can be used by those, because the underlying APIs have been built out at the same point of this as well. So we've got that basic product which works really well, fits into that self-service model very well, really sort of benefits right now from being curated to a smaller set of Teams templates, because if it was vast, people would look at it and go, I've not got time for this, so I'll just create a fresh one. So we've got that excellent starting point. I expect over time this is going to get much better for Microsoft. But with that, it's better that they've launched it now rather than waited. So creating Teams templates is pretty straightforward. We can go into the Teams templates. This is the Teams Admin Center, the tack on screen here. If you're familiar with this but haven't been in for a while, then you'll have seen the Manage Teams and two new areas that have popped up: the Teams policies over the last few months and Teams templates. And we've got the built-in ones, Microsoft's ones here. So adopt Office 365, manage a project, manage an event, onboard employees. I look at these and think, I don't think every organization would want all of these available to everybody. But the good thing is, when you create your own, those are the things that will show first. So adding this is pretty straightforward. Press add, and we can either create it from scratch. Perhaps we've actually done it properly and had a workshop with the right people, and we've drawn out what a team should look like. We haven't just muddled our way through. So we could create it from scratch. If we've experimented and found those areas that work, and now we're trying to onboard that best practices, then we can use an existing team. Or if we're replicating existing templates, customizing those for certain people, then we can use an existing template as well. So I'm going to use an existing team here. I've got my Mark 8 project team. Microsoft partners in the room will recognize these names from the Microsoft demo tenants. If you've not seen the Microsoft demo tenants, they're brilliant. If you're looking to try and get something with all the pre-populated content in as a starting point. I think that project team is fab. It's got all the right channels in, it's got all the right tabs in, it's got all the right apps. It's the essence of what our projects should look like at Contoso. So I'm going to use that as my starting point. I'm going to go in and I'm going to make sure that it's got all the right things. So I've added the additional apps. So I want to use Microsoft Lists in this. I think this will be a great addition to our business. So I've added Microsoft Lists as an app for all our new sessions going forward, or our new teams going forward. And I've also made sure that the project plan is in there, named accordingly, and I'm going to add a link to a SharePoint page, because I want people to be drawn to the the project site that has our stats on. So I've added all of those in, and I'm going to name those accordingly so that they're there. Now, once I save that, from a user perspective, then they're going to see the results of this when they go and create a team. So they'll go to the Teams admin center, they'll look on the left rail, they'll see the option to join or create a team. And instead of just from scratch or from a group or team, they see the list of templates, and you'll see our custom templates. They don't have the fancy icons like the Adopt Office 365 or Manage a Project has, but they'll see our standard project with my description, our company's Contoso's standard project team template or department team in the list that they can pick from. And that is it possible to remove templates? You can delete the, sorry, that's a question in the chat. You can create new ones and then delete them afterwards. You can't delete Microsoft's templates at the moment. So if you don't want them to see the templates such as Adopt Office 365, then you'll be well set to create some useful templates so that they don't show at the top of the list. So in the background, this is Word away. Provision that team. It can take a few minutes for this to happen. It will create the team via the normal process. And then there's clearly an engine in the background that goes and then implements our information architecture for the team. And it's created our new team. But the one thing that it doesn't do is it hasn't, for example, I've got an event news web page at the top of this. It hasn't set up that tab with the link to the right page. A user will still need to go and then do this themselves. There's still some tasks that they'll have to do, but they've seen what this should look like. So hopefully, if they see event news and they press setup tab, they'll know to do the right thing. Can you avoid the messages in the new team? Can you customize the messages in the new team, avoiding the Microsoft welcome message? I don't think you can at the moment. That's something I'd have to check. I don't 100% know the answer on that. I don't believe so. At least not in the Teams templates model. So the Teams access model. So I'll go through this, fairly briefly, and then we'll go on to guests. So this is designed for simplicity, and this is a blessing, but also a bit of a curse, because it means that we're going for a pretty simple access model for Teams. Now, the key advice here is really to try and stick to this rather than trying to build in your own custom permissions model. So if you think about the reason why teams and groups are successful, why they've driven such great usage of SharePoint document libraries, why they've been easy to get people collaborating, is because they're simple, right? We haven't got a complex permissions model by default, and it's more difficult to implement one. So don't try and split out your permissions, creating custom document libraries necessarily, or folder permission levels underneath your team. In the same way, things like private channels, they use their own SharePoint site rather than a separate document library or just folder permissions inside the document library. That's because the design for Microsoft is to keep this simple at the moment. So if you keep it simple, that makes it easy for users to manage, and their expectations will be met when it comes to access. If you've perhaps supported more people using custom permissions, then we run the danger of people looking at things like the team's members and owners and assuming that's the only people that have access to it if the team is set to private, adding data to that, and then getting caught out by excessive permissions being added. So keep this simple. Question on here, is it possible to bulk add new members to a team? For example, if I have a distribution list and I want to add all the members. Yes, absolutely. The caveat with that is, if you add a distribution group, if you add a group to a group, if you add a distribution list to a team, it doesn't add the distribution list, it adds the members at that point in time. So it expands it once. So if that distribution list is updated in the future with new members or people are removed, it doesn't keep the two in sync. So dynamic groups, it might be the answer there. but we can't use nested groups, so adding groups into groups to simplify the model, but we can use it as a bulk method to add. So group management is pretty simple. Add a member. Apologies if this is absolutely basic stuff to Teams users in there. This is aimed at being the simple model and that we want to keep and use. People can request membership into the team if they want. We're keeping this absolutely as simple as possible. And I hate to stress something like that, but we absolutely want to keep this the simplest possible model that we can, so people's expectations are met when they look at what is a very simple user interface. Can Microsoft Teams templates be exported and imported to another tenant? That in that UI version, I don't believe they can, but again, follow up by pinging me on Twitter, and I can do a bit more checking if needed, but I don't believe you can export them as a zip file or something like that at the moment, no. So managing guest access. So this is an area where I think things can get a little bit messy if you've needed to rush to enable things like guest access in a tenant, and things might not work as you might expect if you were purely a Teams admin, because it's got so many hooks into other places. But first of all, what are guests for? Another question here. As I said, I'll answer them as we go along. Can you add a group in the scheduled meeting instead of every single one with the plus sign? When you're scheduling a meeting in the Teams user interface, you used to have to add every single person one by one. They recently added the ability, I say recently, within the last 3 months, for you to add a group or a distribution list when you create a meeting when you create a scheduled meeting. So the answer to that is yes, but it does need to be, I think, a distribution group at the moment. Back to guests in Teams. So guests are for external collaboration. They're not needed for everything though. So if you want to chat with somebody outside your organization, then you don't need to enable guest access. Those of you that have used Skype for Business, or as it was, Link, might remember the concept of federation or federated organizations. And the Teams equivalent that uses the same underlying functionality, but up-versioned, is external users and external chat. So if me and you want to chat between our two organizations, I've received an email from you, I want to start a chat message like I did in Skype for Business, then I can do so in Teams without you being a guest in my tenant. We can chat across that bridge using external access. We can call each other back and forward and so on. But I can't give you that doesn't automatically give you access to files. It doesn't mean I can add you into a team. And if we schedule a meeting, then absolutely, in almost all scenarios, and if we're thinking of the default settings that most organizations use, people don't need to be a guest in our tenant to join a meeting or join a call. The beauty of Teams is that we can schedule a meeting with a potential customer or client outside our organization, and they can join the meeting without needing to prove who they are, without needing to install the client on their PC, Mac, or Linux machine. They don't need any account at all. They don't need any federated relationship. They can just join and tap into the client, whatever name that they want to choose. Guests are for external collaboration, where we want to bring somebody into that project or working group, and we want to be able to share all of the chats that we're having, files, access to apps. And because it does so much more than just meetings or chatting between two tenants, it's like Teams relies on settings consistently set across Microsoft 365. So we need to enable Teams guest access Azure AD guest access, and the right SharePoint external sharing configuration. And guests are different to external users. So if we have a chat between tenants or someone joins a meeting, then nothing gets created inside our tenant to support that. It's just the external person. When we bring a guest in, then it creates an Azure AD guest identity. And we have control over who can invite people as guests into our tenant. But we have less control over who can invite our users into there's a question there. I'll come back to that in a second. But we have less control over who can invite our users in as a guest. Can you please explain guest access and chat? We saw several times that this is unavailable if you are a guest. So if you are a guest in a tenant, then this is where Microsoft have been improving things, but not improved it just enough yet. So when you invite someone in as a guest, then that creates that identity for them. And that's different to if they're an external user. So if I'm chatting with somebody, they're not a guest in our tenant, then I find them as a contact and I start chatting. If I've invited them in as a guest, then effectively they've got a temporary account inside our tenant as well. So if they switch tenants in their Teams client, then there's effectively the guest person that I can talk to as well, which does make it quite confusing if you're mixing the two together. So the advice is try not to mix external chat and people who are in as guests. If you're working closely with an organization, then bring them in as guests and talk to them as guests, bring them into teams and so on. If you if you're not collaborating with them, but you're just occasionally chatting, then use external chat. And then you won't have that scenario where somebody shows in your Teams client as an external user, where the chat goes to their Teams client in their tenant, and they won't be a guest who can come in and switch organizations in the tenant as well. It's an area where it can get reasonably confusing quickly. Another question has come through: is there no way to disable guests viewing other users' email addresses? So I've not got it on screen at the moment, but there is new settings that do enable those privacy settings. And because of the time, I won't go into that in detail, but yes, you can disable guests viewing other email addresses. That's in the Azure AD portal. So this is the difference between what they can do. Guests can do almost everything a team member can do by default. Now, you'll see that there are areas such as being able to delete messages and so on, and post in particular channels, creating channels. Each team owner has the ability to limit these X's on the right-hand side of what a guest can do. For example, if you don't want a guest to be able to go and create a channel or delete or edit the messages that they posts. Now, the place where you'll find those options for guest users permissions is on this page here, external collaboration settings. This may not be up to date, or my tenant might not have got the feature yet, but we've got the ability to further limit the permissions that they can see, i.e. what email addresses they can see and so on. And that won't give them access to look in the members and so on. They won't have access to the GAL, but they will be able to see who's in the team with them. So wrapping up for today, I'm just going to give you a quick summary. If there's any questions, we've got 2 minutes left, so be very quick. Microsoft 365 groups and teams are absolutely interwoven. So implementing good governance for Microsoft 365 groups enables good governance for teams, but also Planner, also Power BI, also Yammer and services like that as well. The self-service processes are better than IT doing this, and the less work that you have in IT managing group management, all the better. Keep your naming policies absolutely simple. And if you're licensed for it, then absolutely look at exploration policies for teams and groups. These are part of that set and forget it model. So your day job is more to do with delivering value to the organization, not mopping up old groups. And Teams templates are something that you should be looking at to see whether you can leverage that now to try and give people the right clues as to how to use Teams properly, rather than them figuring things out for them by themselves. And guest access, most importantly, this is about SharePoint settings. This is about Azure AD settings. This is Microsoft 365 Groups guest access settings, as well as Teams. So it's 11 o'clock, the top of the hour. Thank you very much for your time today. I've enjoyed chatting to you. And of course, if you want to ask any more questions or follow up, please do at Steve Goodman on Twitter, and I'm also on LinkedIn and other places as well. Thank you.
Steve, thanks for a great presentation and thanks for your time today. We really appreciate it. Okay, everybody. Thank you again to Steve Goodman there today for his great webinar. This is the end of today's webinar. Please check out sharepointeurope.com for further details of all upcoming webinars as part of Teams. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be added to the Resource Centre, where you'll be notified by email when it becomes available. Thank you for joining us today. Take care and goodbye.